Heading into the Agreements app, this is when everything culminates. The agreement record brings together at its core the resources that you are subscribing to or providing access to with the license terms that govern those resources. And this is what fuels that classic publication finder integration that displays those license terms. So I'm going to come in during the break. I did a little bit of setup. So I am going to create a new agreement and then bring together the various pieces that we've been going with today. And so I'm going to name this my Alexander Street Drama Agreement. And really, the way that you kind of break down your agreements is which resources are governed by the same license. So you might, if all of your EBSCO resources are governed by the EBSCO standard license, they all have the same terms, then you might just have an EBSCO agreement. But if your EBSCO journals have one license and your EBSCO ebooks have another license, you would want to break those into two different agreements so that the license for the journals would be applied to the packages and titles that it belongs to. And your different license for the ebooks with different terms would apply to the titles or packages containing those ebooks. So that's kind of at the core. Really, there are a lot of schools of thought on how the agreements are broken down, but fundamentally, that is kind of the premise that you're operating under. And then you can take it to varying degrees of kind of complexity based on your setup. And a great resource for kind of getting peer support about, hey, I have this particular situation. Has anyone else encountered this? And how did you deal with it in terms of your agreement structure? Is the ERM SIG, which meets Wednesdays at 8 a.m. Eastern. And they also have a channel on the Folio community Slack called ERM-team. And that is a great peer idea sharing group. And the product owners for the ERM apps are also participants within that particular Slack channel and that SIG. So if you have ideas for enhancements or questions about how something should be working, or have I encountered a bug, that's a great place to go and get that community support as well. So I'm going to pretend that my Alexander Street Drama package has its own specific license. I'm going to enter my name. I can enter a description if I so choose. And then I have my status. Perhaps if I'm, there is an enhancement to build out functionality for e-resource trials, but in the interim, I typically will use a requested status to denote something is a trial, and then, close it with, we're not going to, rejected because we decided not to go with this after a trial, or if we move into an active subscription after the trial, I can change to an active status. My renewal priority is definitely renew for review or cancel. You don't need to put this in, but this is something that can be filtered within the Agreements app. And then whether something is perpetual. Alternative names are coming to greet us again, providing another point for searching for these agreements. And then the last required field on the agreement record is going to be your start date for your agreement period. Now, an agreement may have multiple periods associated with it. You may have a period if it's something where you review it annually. Maybe each agreement period will be a year long. Or maybe it's something that you just kind of continue to renew and there's no changes. You might just have one open-ended agreement period. I typically advise creating a new agreement period when something fundamentally changes about the agreement. Maybe the license is updated. Maybe there's been a massive change in terms of coverage or in terms of the titles that are available for a specific agreement. Then you might want to create a new agreement period. I'm going to say that this is starting on January 1st, and I'm going to leave this open-ended for now. If I were to add another agreement period, I would need to close the end date on this one because I can only have one open-ended agreement period at a time. I can also indicate a cancellation deadline if I have one for this particular agreement. Internal contacts work in much the same way as they do in licenses. I'm linking over to my users app, and then I'm defining a role here. These roles are independent from the roles on the license, and so you can establish different roles for license internal contacts versus agreement internal contacts, and you can do that in your settings. Agreement lines are always going to be added after you have initially saved the agreement. So we're going to scroll past those for now and go down to my licenses. Now I'm going to add a license. This will link over to my licenses app. And during the break, I created an Alexander Street license. Here, I am going to say the status of this agreement. Controlling means that this is the active license where the terms are applying to this agreement. You can only have one controlling license at a time, but you may have multiple licenses. So if in 2024, I had to renegotiate and create a new license for Alexander Street, I could then shift this to be a historical license and then link my new license as the new controlling license. And then if I have any amendments applied to my license, I need to say whether these apply to this particular agreement or not, as we discussed earlier. So here, I'm going to say that the amendment is current. And I can say something about the amendment here, updates walk-in user terms, so that I have that here. And then I do have the option to add an external license. So you may have cases where you have licenses that you're not actually maintaining in Folio. Maybe your consortium is kind of the license owner, but you want to track it. So this would not be available for that license terms integration with Publication Finder, but you can link to an external license or upload a copy of an external license so that you have an easy access record of what applies here. But that is different from the license that you are maintaining the record for in Folio yourself. Your organizations here work in much the same way as they do on the license. I'm setting my primary organization. I'm linking my organization, and we're going to go with Alexander Street Press. And we're going to say that they are both my vendor and my content provider. And then supplementary documents. These work the same as they do in your license record. Add a name and then at least one of the three, an upload, a physical location, or a URL, and the supplementary documents are repeatable. For right now, this usage data you can ignore. This is not compatible with the EBSCO Folio ERM builds, and it's actually going to be able to be hidden starting in the Lotus release. You would use usage consolidation in your Folio setup as opposed to the e-usage app, which libraries with local KB admin, which is kind of the option for people that aren't using the EBSCO knowledge base. But because agreements are used by libraries using both knowledge base options, either local KB or e-holdings, it appears on the agreement records, but will be able to be hidden beginning in the Lotus release. Last but not least, we have related agreements. And so we can relate an agreement, and I'm going to link this to my EBSCO eJournal agreement. This isn't really a real life scenario, but let's say that you had an agreement with Alexander Street, but then when they were bought by ProQuest, you had to update your agreement to be a ProQuest agreement. So you've closed your Alexander Street, but under your new ProQuest agreement, you do want to harken back to the Alexander Street agreement because they are related. So I can link them together, and then I can specify the type of relationship that they have. And so, I can say that um, this supersedes this agreement, or I can just be kind of generic and say that they're related to each other and then specify in my note what that relationship might be. And so once I have entered everything here, I can save and close, and my agreement has been created. From here, this is when I need to actually add in my resources. So I can add in a resource from the agreement itself. I can add an agreement line and then link to an e-resource. And so I can search for Alexander Street drama. And I can link from here. I can save and close. I can also initiate that link from the eHoldings app itself. So if I wanted to go to Alexander Street drama, come in here, you can see this is now linked to this agreement, but I could also add from here. And so depending on your workflow, you may choose to add from either place. If I click on this line, it's going to link me back in a single click to my agreement, where I can see my agreement line. I can see some high-level information that this is provided by Alexander Street, that it's a package, my title count, selected versus total. And then if I were to click on this line itself, this takes me to the agreement line, where I can edit. I can add when this is active from in my particular collection. This differs from the coverage dates. I can add a description, a note, and I can also link this to a PO line. So if I click on Add PO line and link a PO line, this will bring up a search box for my Orders app, where I can search for Alexander, and I can actually tie this agreement line to the record of its acquisition. So that brings those two areas of Folio together. Once I save this, if I were to return to my agreement, I can see that linked from here. And in a single click, I can get over to my PO line, see the details of the acquisition, and once I've paid for this, I'll have a link to any related invoices here. So this is something that we'll continue to work on in our acquisitions training together.